You don't have to stop breathing to be dead. Some people are buried long before they ever touch the grave. You see it in their eyes, numb, hollow, like the soul packed its bags and left long ago. Arthur Morgan was a killer, an outlaw, a man made of gunpowder and regret. But in the end, he became something more. Not because he escaped death, but because he stopped waiting for it to take him. The moment Arthur Morgan learns he's dying isn't when his story ends. It's when it finally begins. For years, Arthur Morgan had been a walking corpse, breathing, moving, killing, but never truly alive. What if I told you the most profound lesson of Red Dead Redemption 2 isn't about how Arthur Morgan dies, but about how he was already dead long before his diagnosis? Today, we're riding alongside the most haunted outlaw in gaming history to understand a truth most of us spend our lives avoiding, that we can die long before they put us in the ground. And if we're not careful, we might never have lived at all. When we first meet Arthur Morgan, he's Dutch van der Linde's loyal enforcer. The muscle, the gun, 20 years of unquestioning loyalty have hollowed him into something less than human, but more than machine. A perfect instrument of another man's will. Look at his eyes in these early missions. There's no joy, no anger, no remorse, just emptiness. This is what psychologists call emotional death, when a person continues the motions of living while experiencing none of its meaning. In his journal, we catch glimpses of the trapped man inside this hollow shell. Brief moments of awareness that something essential has been lost. But awareness isn't enough to break 2 decades of psychological conditioning. Even surrounded by what he calls family, Arthur's profoundly alone. He exists as a function, not a person. The gun hand, the collector, the enforcer. His identity is entirely tied to his utility. He's loyal, dutiful, efficient. He follows Dutch like a soldier with no voice. He rides, he shoots, he steals. And for what? For a dream that was never his to begin with. He journals, but never speaks his truth. He reflects, but never acts on what he knows deep down. Arthur isn't a man. He's a weapon, pointed by someone else. Dutch speaks of freedom while building a cage. And Arthur? He locks the door from the inside. You ever feel that? Like you're performing a version of yourself. Not for love, not for purpose, but because it's all you've ever known. That's where Arthur lives. A place where routine drowns truth. His soul flickers, but it never flames. And just like many of us, he doesn't even realize he's fading until death taps him on the shoulder. Think about your own life for a moment. The roles you play, the functions you serve. How much of what you do each day is truly chosen? And how much is simply expected? At what point does a performance become so complete that there's nothing left underneath? The Van der Linde gang is always one score away from freedom, one job from Tahiti, one robbery from putting it all behind them. It's the perfect psychological prison, one where the inmates believe the key is just around the corner. Dutch's constant refrain of have faith isn't just manipulation, it's psychological conditioning. Faith requires a suspension of critical thinking. It demands surrendered judgment. For a man already dead inside, faith in something external becomes the only animating force. Watch Arthur collecting debts for Leopold Strauss. Even as he ruins lives, he tells himself he's just following orders, just doing what's needed for the family. This is what psychologists call moral injury, damage to the soul caused by violating one's core ethical beliefs. The encounter with Thomas Downing is particularly revealing. The tuberculosis Arthur contracts isn't just a plot device, it's symbolic justice. Arthur has been spiritually sick long before he becomes physically ill. The disease merely makes visible what was already there. When the doctor tells Arthur he has tuberculosis, a death sentence in 1899, something extraordinary happens. Instead of despair, we see the first glimmer of authentic life in Arthur's eyes. This is the paradox at the heart of Arthur Morgan's story. Physical death becomes a catalyst for spiritual rebirth. When the future is taken away, the present suddenly matters. When time becomes finite, meaning becomes essential. Watch how Arthur changes after his diagnosis. He questions Dutch more frequently. He helps strangers without expectation of reward. He begins to see the world, really see it, perhaps for the first time. What would change in your life if you knew your time was limited? Not in the abstract way we all understand mortality, but with concrete certainty? What would suddenly matter? What would instantly become irrelevant? For the first time, he's not chasing anyone else's dream. He's watching his own life slip away, fast. But instead of collapsing into fear, he opens his eyes. He starts to see the people who need him, the lies he's upheld, the future he'll never see unless he does something now. His actions shift. He helps rains fall find peace. He gives John a chance at freedom. He rides through storms to say goodbye to Charlotte, to leave behind a gentler version of himself. He begins to feel, not in words, but in choices. He's still dying, but for the first time, he's living. Isn't that strange? That we only start waking up when we know we're out of time? Arthur's not heroic because he dies. He's heroic because he chooses to live, even when it's too late to save himself. That's the part we miss. Redemption isn't about fixing the past. It's about how you show up in the end. And in the end, Arthur rides into the dark with his head held high. When we acknowledge our limited time, we must also acknowledge our responsibility to fill it with meaning. Arthur's conversation with Sister Calderon represents a critical psychological turning point. When she urges him to take a gamble that love exists, she's not speaking of romantic love, but of meaning itself. The faith that life can have purpose even in its final moments. The poetic symmetry of Arthur helping the Downs family, the very family he helped destroy, isn't just narrative elegance. It's psychological principle in action. Redemption requires confronting our specific sins, not just generic goodness. What beliefs are you building your life upon? What would happen if those foundations were revealed as false? Would you have the courage to build something new from the ruins, or would you cling to comfortable lies? As Arthur's physical body weakens, his moral clarity strengthens. This is the second awakening, the death of illusion. When we stop lying to ourselves about who we are and what matters, we create space for authentic existence, however brief it might be. In sacrificing himself for John, Arthur finally authors his own story. No longer Dutch's weapon or the gang's enforcer, but a man making a conscious moral choice. This is the moment Arthur truly lives, even as his body fails him.
I gave you all I had. I did.
If you earn the high honor ending which is also canon, Arthur watches his final sunrise with a sense of peace that eluded him throughout his violent life. Not because he's cheated death, but because he's finally discovered what it means to live authentically, if only for a brief time. Arthur's physical death is inevitable from the moment of his diagnosis, but his spiritual rebirth was always a choice. This is a third awakening, the power of agency. Even in circumstances we cannot control, we always retain the freedom to choose how we respond to them. Maybe you've been loyal to the wrong people. Maybe you've been loyal to the wrong version of yourself. Maybe you've been asleep, waiting for a wake-up call. Well, this is it. Arthur didn't have a second chance. You do. He didn't get to live free. But maybe you can, if you stop waiting for permission, if you stop holding your breath, if you stop dying before you're actually dead. So the question isn't whether Arthur deserved redemption. The question is, do you? Arthur Morgan's physical form dies on that mountainside, but his impact continues. Through John, through Abigail and Jack, through every person whose life he touched in his final, authentic days. Arthur Morgan's journey from death in life to life before death offers a profound psychological truth. We can spend decades breathing without ever truly being alive. We can accumulate years without accumulating meaning. To anyone trying to find meaning before it's too late, Arthur didn't die a good man. He became one. And that's the lesson. It's not how you start. It's how you choose to end. So don't wait for a disease or a disaster to start being who you were meant to be, because the real tragedy isn't dying. It's never truly living. Remember, death is not the greatest loss. The greatest loss is what dies inside us while we live. If you found this exploration of Arthur Morgan's psychological journey meaningful, subscribe for more analyses that find universal truths in virtual worlds. Until then, remember, it's never too late to start living before you die.